Hi. Did you know that in 2008, Joe Brackentelli from MSNBC.com rated United Airlines the worst of the major U.S. air carriers? They were last in on-time arrivals, they were first in customer complaints, and they had just emerged from a 3-year bankruptcy that left their management structure and their fiscal management in tatters. My name is James Johnson, and we're going to explore through a case study of United Airlines through the lens of a strategic communication model with an emphasis on audience analysis, how they handled the tragedy of September 11, 2001. This is United Airlines' statement of corporate responsibility. It outlines that they are a global airline that touches people and businesses every day, and that they have a specific responsibility to a variety of their publics, including their employees, their customers, and the communities that they serve. So what went wrong with United Airlines that day? What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how they stack up, how their communications programs supports this statement of responsibility, and if there's room for improvement. When performing an audience analysis, as United should have done in the case of the pilots' wives of September 11th, there are 3 primary questions that need to be asked. Who is the organization's audience? What does the audience know about the company? And what does the audience know about the topic? Well, the constituencies of United's organizations that day were the pilots' wives. Their husbands had gone to work, and they were involved in a terrible, unimaginable tragedy. Not a whole lot of communication was coming from the company at that time. So the organization's constituencies were the pilots' wives. What did they think about the company? Well, at the time, they probably thought that United was very much like a family. Their husbands had been working for the company, and they may have even gone on a tour of the facilities or participated in company events and made themselves feel like they were part of the company because their husbands worked there. What did the constituency know about the topic? Well, at the time, 9/11 was very confusing, and nobody knew a whole lot about the topic. So that's the angle United Airlines communication program should have taken. Some of the failures of United Airlines at 9/11 with the pilots' wives were that they failed to anticipate the probable audience reactions from United's communications policy, which at the time for that particular public was very limited or none at all. One wife found out about her husband's death on television. The other wife found out about her husband's death on an answering machine, and still another found out by talking over the phone with a United official. So United absolutely failed to gauge the probable audience reaction. They expected the wives to understand United's problems, that they had other things that they were dealing with. The level of audience understanding at this time was completely ignored by the airline. There was no communication going either way at that point. And the audience relationship with the company was now ruined. Some alternatives for success on the point of United is they should have analyzed the audience through the lens of a strategic communications model. They should have analyzed their audience, then they would have been better able to craft a message that not only would make sense, but would also be sensitive and that they could empathize with the wives. The first step should be identify their constituency. At this point, it was the pilots' wives that were suffering a sudden tragedy. Had anybody at United simply put themselves in that situation where their spouse or a loved one may have been affected or been on one of those aircraft at the time that they impacted with the buildings, they might have come at this with a little bit different angle. Assess the constituency's perception of the organization. As stated earlier, initially speaking, the pilots' wives' perception of the company was probably very favorable. Treated them like family. The point of number 2 is to highlight that they should have chosen a rich channel of communication. With a situation such as a terrorist attack, where there's a lot of ambiguous news coming out and not a whole lot of information coming out from United itself, they should have chosen a more rich channel of communication to communicate with those pilots' wives. These are people. They're not contractual obligations, as John Hopkins, the United spokesperson, has said. By rich channel, I mean they should have had a face-to-face conference, or taken an auto or taken a bus to the location so they could tell these people in person. Determine the context. What does the audience know about the topic? At that time, there was a lot of conflicting reports coming around. Nobody knew whether or not there was going to be additional terrorist attacks. Nobody knew about what was going to happen to the diverted flights, and United had to deal with not only their government publics, but also had to deal with grounded crew and passengers of other aircraft. Audience reaction was a devastating loss. United failed to take this into account when dealing with the pilots' wives. As a matter of fact, some of their communiques, for instance, telling one of the wives to pass along to their mother-in-law that they could no longer fly for free on United, really wasn't the kind of communication channel that United needed to take, particularly in light of their corporate responsibility statement read earlier in the presentation. They also needed to take into account the level of audience understanding. The level of understanding of the audience at this time was difficult and probably very hard to process because it was such a shock. United very well may have taken this opportunity to have engaged the wives in dialogue to find out what their expectations of the company were at that time and address them in a more meaningful way. The relationship to the company. The company viewed the wives as a secondary public or a secondary constituency, whereas the wives probably viewed themselves as a little bit more intimate with the company because their husbands worked for them for such a long time. In short, United has failed to do a thorough audience analysis within the framework of a strategic communications model. They failed to take into account their constituencies, their probable reaction to it, and their knowledge of the topic. The consequences of those actions are that the pilots' wives have now formed themselves into a small special interest group that has a very dim view of United Airlines, and the news is spreading. In 2008, MSNBC rated United Airlines as one of the worst, if not the worst, major U.S. air carrier. United Airlines is in a unique position right now to work with those very same wives who they slighted years earlier, to revamp their communication program, to offer a more meaningful communications program within the framework of a strategic model, and move forward with empathy and with conviction and integrity that their statement of corporate responsibility entails. Thank you very much for your attention.